I was doing all kinds of coffee chats, trying to do networking, doing LinkedIn posts, all the things. None of those things were what led me to my next role.
This, mi gente, is Vivian Chang, an e-commerce executive who's about to unpack one of the least talked about parts of a career, the middle. Welcome back to the Corporate Detox, the podcast where we talk about work, ambition, and life in and after corporate. Because, mi gente, we needed this. It's me, Erilsa, longtime marketing expert and your favorite corporate escape artist. I first met Vivian as she walked onto the Commerce Next stage as the former VP of GNC. At the time, I was less interested in the title she had held. 20 years leading digital commerce at companies like, yes, GNC, Clorox, RetailMeNot, Plated. I was more interested in what happened after, the part no one talks about enough, the space between who you were at work and who you're becoming next. Because I know that space well. After leaving Amazon, I found myself asking the same questions Vivian had to confront. What happens when the title disappears? How do you rebuild confidence when the path you plan changes? What do you do in those first few weeks when you're trying to find your footing? And how do you know when you found what comes next? And for Vivian, the middle started with a moment that so many of us in executive roles never think is going to happen to us.
The actual decision to say, hey, we're cutting this whole team, we're outsourcing, that drastic of a move, I'd say, came as a surprise.
You don't see it at that moment.
Yeah, it's sort of, unfortunately, your typical like corporate virtual call, because I was mostly remote. I was given the benefit of getting a heads up and also being looped into the comms plan for the broader team. Not a long window, but at least a little bit of a window.
Did you feel that it was happening?
I wasn't surprised, and that was part of a lot of different arrangements ahead of that to try and figure out how things might work, how it might function differently within the larger enterprise organization. It was certainly going to be like a repositioning. I just think that the ultimate decision of how they went about it was a little bit short-sighted, and unfortunately, it's one of those typical consulting recommendations that sound good on paper, and then it's really messy in actual.
Yeah. Then what people don't tell you, and I wish like now, like in hindsight, it doesn't have to do with your talent. It might have to do with the skill set they're looking for at the time, or or budget cuts, strict budget cuts coming through. It's just like no one tells you that your talent only can take you so far. When you're thinking of your career, were you prepared for that departure?
This time, I'm able to really look at it saying, like, I was a ball of anxiety, back then.
You're an optimist, but what's the worst case scenario that came in through your head when you were in that call?
Honestly, it was the impact on the team. And that is still, I think the hardest part of having lived through that. It's a team of really talented people, and I think we were doing really good work. It's just work that was not the core business, right? And the economy is not going as well, when business isn't going as well, it sort of doesn't matter how much talent there is and how much potential there is. I think that was the hardest part, feeling like those intangibles weren't valued or seen.
And it's interesting because so many of us go through that part of our career when we become former something, right? At that point, when you're introducing yourself, former VP, former X, how did it feel? Were you ready for that moment?
Yeah, I think transparently, it's a little bit of vulnerability. There's a part of me that wants to kind of gloss over it and not tell anyone, but I also believe in being transparent and not misleading people. I also think that, the early years of my career, I never had a former something, right? You don't leave a job until you've gotten another job. You just jump like one to the next, to the next, to the next. And I feel like as I've become more senior and a little bit with the changing times, it's much more common to have sort of these like breaks, voluntary or involuntary, honestly. It's something that I still wrestle with candidly, but I'm choosing to take it as a blessing and trying to really take this time to think about, you know, what do I want to be my identity, or what do I want to leave, right? Instead of always sort of tying myself to a title or a position.
It seems like you started with what felt comfortable, kind of floating the message, and then you had a clearer message.
It also took me a while to tell my parents because I think they have such a different frame of reference of how work is. My
Yep.
dad worked for the same company for 30 years, right? And so every time I have a jump, it's almost like I think they're a little bit like, why? That's the only role model of how do you build a career that I had in the US, right? And so I think about people who maybe kind of have a lot of exposure to folks who are entrepreneurial or maybe doing more like investing or like alternative ways to live a life. I think it's taken me a while to break out of that mental mold of this is the only way, and it's head down, work hard, just do the time, and that is what will bring that promise of security and sort of success in the traditional sense.
I wish that younger people were told how messy it gets the more senior you are.
And I think what was really interesting about it, of course, in retrospect, right, is I was stressing myself out so much. My husband was joking, like, you're busier now when you're not working than you ever were working.
How long was the transition period to your next gig?
I think it was about 6 months. So I definitely was count myself lucky.
No one really talks about that. Was that how it was manifesting for you? Or were you kind of just problem solver and doer? Like, okay, what can I do next?
I'm always like a bit of a problem solver, keep myself busy. How can I be productive on moving things forward? But at the same time, that is a weight. And yeah, I think there's some like guilt built into it and a whole lot of what if scenarios. And honestly, all I have found over time is just how do I allow some space for it, but don't let that take over. I have to sort of like cut that off and again, focus on what is in my control, what can I do?
What did you do in the moment? I mean, maybe not in the moment, but to not allow it to take over.
Not a ton, and of course, then you've got confidentiality in play and all of that. For me, it went back to reaching out to sort of in confidence, people that know me well, that know the situation, having those conversations, reiterating my relationships with people that worked with me, trying to, again, just position themselves well for wherever their next career move might be. Some of it, honestly, is just finding distraction, like just keeping busy with things that are outside. To me, it actually always has been helpful, even though it sounds sort of like a silly tactic.
So, what happens when you don't have a title? When you were announcing maybe that you had left, do you remember a conversation that you had with somebody? Like, is it a gradual thing? Do you first say this and then say this?
I think originally it was sort of like I would go to these networking events and dinners and say, I'm about to leave, right? Or I'm leaving. And everyone's question is always like, what's next? I think that's the part, like, again, we're all programmed that you don't leave something until you have something next. And sort of deliberately putting a pause to that and say, I'm actually like choosing to take some time to figure out what I want, to say that it's not a judgment call on who I am if I have an active title or not. So, yeah, I think having those conversations first with friends and friends in the industry actually really did help, because I have had a lot of really great conversations with people on, as they know that I'm leaving, on hearing their stories about like how hard things have been for them. So we're able to then like support each other, or two, really challenge each other to think about what we want to do next. That maybe it's not just the automatic, you always want to keep going up in that like corporate ladder, and that's, the trophy at the end. I actually feel like by being more forthcoming with this transition in my life, I've actually had the ability to connect with people in a way that's different. And I really valued that. And I feel like that's been really sort of this like blessing that these are the relationships, these are the conversations that I'm going to think about. It's not the, meetings that I was in when I did the corporate role or anything like that.
You're like, okay, a repositioning is probably gonna happen here. What happens then for you?
I was doing all kinds of coffee chats, trying to do networking, doing LinkedIn posts.
Okay, un momento here, because if you've ever been in transition, you know this exact instinct. The floor drops out, and instead of taking a breath, you double down. I remember creating calendar blocks to define my new free time, rushing to meet a career coach, a lot of podcasts on the Genius Zone, just to quiet the anxiety of not knowing what's next, to tell myself I was being productive. But if we're being honest, I was just trying to avoid sitting with the discomfort of the middle. As Vivian looked back at all that frantic motion, she realized something that completely shattered her idea of how executive careers actually work.
Ironically, like none of those things were what led me to my next role. The next role was entirely off of having past relationships, keeping those alive. Ultimately, right, that's the stuff I actually love. I love getting to know people. I love checking in with them and making sure they know what's going on in my life. That is ultimately what opened the door to my next role. Yeah, I think it's just like we try to, at least I do, I try to control so much. And it was another lesson that like some things just happen outside of our control.
What's interesting though, it seems like you said you do it naturally. You are always kind of keeping up with those people. And I wonder if that minimizes some of the luck. Is
Yeah.
that your number one tip for people, like that you learned from that period?
Yeah, I think so. And it's funny that you say that because for a long time, I think I just assumed everyone was how I was, right? Like, love meeting new people, love checking in. Honestly, I enjoy going to things like a Commerce Next or a dinner and being next to someone that I never knew and building the new connection. And I do think that is ultimately, I mean, that's the currency I think that I carry with me, right? Beyond the title, beyond the job, I have this network that of just people I trust that are good people. But it does take work. It does take proactive effort. I think that's something that more recently I've realized is a strength. Again, it comes naturally. It's something that I love, but it's not the default for everyone. The other piece that I've learned around that is I've never had someone feel like you're bothering me because you're reaching out to get a coffee or to say how things are going. And that's oftentimes, I think, the hesitation. Their life is so put together. Why would they want to talk to me? And I realized, like, that's not true, right? Everyone has something that they're probably not showing on their LinkedIn or their Instagram. And it's the one-on-one conversations where you really get to know someone.
One of the things as I'm talking to you is very familiar with what you felt this whole trajectory as you talked about. That was very linear at first. One thing I personally found is I've been more resilient because of my background. I always was a hyphenate. I was American and I was Dominican. I always had to explain myself. I wonder for you as an Asian American, do you think that has anything to do with how you've been able to successfully navigate these transition and these chapters?
Yeah, I do think the sort of living in that hyphenated space. I'm Chinese American and women leader. One has been, it's such a core part of how I show up in workplaces. And I think part of this is the representation part is what kept me on the corporate side for so long because I do want to be someone that other Chinese American women or like kids of immigrant parents can look up to say like, hey, she is speaking at so and so, like it's not all that stereotypical like white male. So that's one part I'm still trying to figure out, like where do I take that like, representation that's really core to me. But I do think on the other side, it has made me resilient. I'm probably like you too. I'm really good at reading a room, figuring out like how to show up and how to adapt. And that translates to the work that I do as well, that I'm very comfortable with change and can stay calm under pressure. And I think that comes from having lived and grown up in that space where it's context shifting from family life where we're speaking Mandarin and then go to school where like I'm the only Asian, right? Like these things are just, I think they build a skill for, at first it's survival, but then I think it becomes like a superpower of how to, like, what is my identity and doesn't have to fit just in one box.
Yeah. It's redefining that success.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that's encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
I hope to be able to be part of those who are figuring out a different path and to
Yeah.
say that it's possible. So I think it's still living and being true to that idea of representation.
You said your husband said you were busier in this time than even working. Now seeing how what happened with how you got the role that you got next, is there something that you wish you would have done differently in that time?
Yeah, I think the taking time for myself, right? That's the biggest lesson that I had, is like I really didn't have much of a break in those 6 months. And then you go right back into a full-time role. And when I have a full-time role, I'm like all in. And so there's just so many things, hobbies that, I didn't really have as much time to do. I've said I'm gonna learn Spanish for years now. Honestly, I still haven't gotten into it. But I think it's, what I'm taking forward now is that it's about sort of like creating that space to, honestly, to feel what feels right more than anything. I had a conversation recently with someone as I'm now thinking about wanting to build something new of my own, right? And once I let my brain know that, I felt like I've got like 10,000 ideas all the time that I can't figure out. And it was causing me stress because I didn't feel I could narrow it down. And I was going to sit down and do SWOT analyses and write business plans and all of that. I had a friend basically said, you need to stop. Don't do all those things. Give yourself, 2 weeks and just sit with the ideas and the thoughts and like get in tune with what feels right. So that's been the practice that I've been really focused on, creating the space to feel and not just try to make it work on paper and really like rush into the business planning side of things.
It's crazy because now you're in a different middle. You're like figuring out, okay, what do I want to build for myself versus the last time you were in the middle? What caused that change that now you were just ready to ask yourself a different question?
What I've realized is I had the seed of some of that desire 2 years ago, and I wasn't ready. I didn't move meaningfully forward towards trying because I think some of it was like lack of confidence. Some of it was like just life circumstances. There was a reason why that didn't work. And this time around, I keep coming back to just the feeling of like, it's exciting rather than anxiety causing this time. And I think through conversations with folks, I've realized like there is a window that we're living in right now that I think is arguably some of the best time to build. We do have AI tools. The job market and economy is not great and probably isn't going to be for a little while. The corporate environment is a lot of how do we make the most of budget cuts and scrutiny and all of those things. That's not something that, anyone loves being a part of. And so it's like, why not take the risk and bet on myself? Really feels like this is a good moment to try something.
Did you ever think about maybe doing this again, going to another VP role and chasing it?
That's always the fallback, right? Like I
Yeah.
was having, and I continue to have candidly, right?
Yeah,
Like I'll talk to recruiters, right?
of course
Like,
you
and
should. Yes.
I'm, once a week I'm browsing LinkedIn and all those things. There's always that like sort of temptation because that is what is familiar and that is what is known. And I have to sort of stop myself, like to go through looking for a job and interviewing and applying. That's also time and energy, right? So
Yeah.
again, like opportunity costs of I'd rather spend that time and energy right now trying to figure out what really excites me and something that I might want to build and something that I can really focus on for the next 5, 7 years or whatever it is.
Today, this middle isn't a bug, it's the defining feature of modern executive careers. Recent labor data shows that over 65% of senior leaders will experience at least one major involuntary transition or career gap, lasting even up to a year. Yes, a full year. I know. Cue the instant spiral. The how am I going to explain this gap on LinkedIn? The what if my savings run out? The was I actually just lucky this whole time and everyone finally figured it out? All the scary, messy, middle of the night emotions that make you want to throw up. So when Vivian hit her second major transition, she had to stop and ask herself a totally different question. Do you rush back into the familiar comfort of another corporate VP title? Or do you give yourself permission to sit in this weird ambiguity and maybe build something you actually own? What does a week right now look at? Are you in the middle of your sitting week where you're sitting in your thoughts?
Yeah, I spent probably 6 weeks in that sitting, and then I actually right around Commerce Next, about like a month ago, I started having enough distinct ideas. So it's still a lot. I've got like 4 ideas that
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
chasing, but they're concrete enough that basically my week is trying to make progress on at least two of them each week, right? So
yeah.
one of them is around consulting, the other is around like small business acquisitions. I'd say I am context shifting all the time right now. Right? Like my morning might be one
Yeah.
thing, and then my afternoon is talking to people about maybe investments or fundraising and just understanding the process. And then I'm doing, conversations like we're having or a
Yeah.
networking dinner that's with marketing ecom. And honestly, like I'm having fun doing it because I feel like I'm learning and
Mm-hmm.
absorbing new content so fast that I'm certainly not bored right now.
Yeah, you're definitely not bored. I think the trickiest thing is what to share with people on LinkedIn, all the things that I'm doing right now. I don't know if people know. I need to make them aware for you as you're in this middle. What are you sharing right now at this moment?
Yeah, that's literally what I'm trying to figure out this week. My LinkedIn is still primarily my marketing e-commerce career, but there's a part of sort of AI that I'm really excited about that I honestly don't talk a lot about on LinkedIn. I might have conversations with friends or people in the industry about it, but I'm not posting about it or talking about it. And then I'm also exploring this idea of acquisition of a small business and applying the corporate skills and operations to something like that. I sort of have an internal debate because I actually think there's probably a lot of people in my network who would be curious about that process or maybe have thought about it and want to come alongside that journey. But it's such a whiplash from what I normally talk about that I haven't quite figured out how to bridge the two yet. But it's literally something I've been thinking about this week.
You know why I love that you shared that because it is messy.
Yeah, that's true. And I think the two things that have helped me, one is recognizing none of these decisions are forever. Hey, maybe I try to build my own thing, do that for a year or two, and like decide actually, like, maybe I would want to go back to corporate. There's no, it's not like one is mutually exclusive forever. I think that shift, even though it's sort of a subtle shift, has really helped. And then the second is honestly just telling people. The more I talk about, like, hey, I'm really like trying to build something, the more real it feels to myself. And it's always a little bit of that gut check of, am I excited? Am I more excited talking about the potential for like building something and sort of that entrepreneurial path, or sort of like the existing corporate roles or another VP kind of position? Those
Yeah,
have been really helpful for me.
totally. And it doesn't have to be entrepreneurship. It could be that you decided to be in corporate. How do you feel today? How does your nervous system feel right in the middle of it?
I think this is the period. There's something that's different than the last 2 years of my corporate role, and even beyond that, when I was in my last transition, that is fundamentally different in that I feel more empowered and more confident than I I have in all the other spaces. And I think a lot of it is just having done the work to create an environment for myself that sort of is is peaceful, but also like a safe space. Like, I now know it's not really worth trying to convince someone who's going to be a naysayer. So I just need to create distance from that, as an example.
Yeah.
And also to have practices in my life, right? Like making sure that I'm eating well and exercising and sleeping enough, like really boring, basic things that are so important right now, so that I can have the energy to sort of live above that level of anxiety. There's always
Yeah.
some anxiety, right? This is new, future is undetermined, just sort of like separating that, the what I know, right? Like, I am fine. I know who I am as a person. My skill sets are my skill sets, like even outside of a corporate or a title, to say, hey, I do know enough people in my network that, hey, I try something, can't figure it out, I can probably phone a friend and they're going to be happy to help me. It's not entirely reliant on myself. And I think there's something in that that is giving me that confidence that I maybe didn't have before.
That confidence that you didn't have before, again, it's like it was built. Do you think we could have built that muscle earlier to be resilient? Like, what would you have loved to tell your younger self?
Yeah. I think the first for me is permission, right? That there's permission to think about other things, to look at other things. I'm not great at it, to be honest, but it's something that I do believe, like, I wish I had started earlier on really tiny things and just built that practice up, because I think that creates more freedom. And then I think the third is sort of being bold and talking about transition with people. I think for so long it was like, hide all of the things that are bad about the job or what's hard about interviewing and the corporate thing, and just make it look really pretty. I think that's ultimately not serving us. I think it's better to build a community where we can support each other and be transparent about where we all are. And that's also where you get like offers of help, people who can challenge us to really build, you know, who we are as a person, and also in the skill set and the networks that we need.
Oh, I love the art of asking because I also am not good at it, and something that I need to build. And when you learn some lessons, please route them back to me. I want them all. The irony isn't lost on me that after talking about what the strategy playbook is for the middle, the biggest takeaway comes down to something most of us are secretly terrible at. Stop trying to make the transition look so pretty. Give yourself permission to be in the middle. Hasta la próxima.